The wind clawed at the frozen forest like an unseen beast, bending the birch trees until they groaned in protest. Snow fell sideways, sharp as shattered glass. High above the white ground, inside a hollowed-out larch tree, an old woman pressed her trembling hands against her chest and listened to death breathe beneath her. The low rumble wasn't thunder. It was hunger. 80-year-old Grace Morozova held her breath as striped shadows circled the base of the tree. Amber eyes flickered through the storm. Somewhere below, a Siberian tiger snarled, its sound vibrating up the trunk like a warning carved into bone. Grace's knees ached. Her fingers were numb, but she did not cry. Not anymore. She had already survived too much to scream now. Before the story pulls you further into that frozen night, pause with me for just a moment. Where are you watching from right now? A warm room, a quiet bus, a sleepless bed? Drop your city below. It still amazes me how one fragile human story can travel across the world and land in another heart. Grace hadn't always lived in a tree. Once, she lived in a pale blue wooden house at the edge of a Yakutian village, the kind of place where smoke curled gently from chimneys and neighbors waved even in -40. Her husband, Ivan, built that house with his own hands. Every nail had a memory. Every creak in the floor knew his footsteps. They had no children. Life never gave them that gift. Instead, it gave them long winters, short summers, and a quiet love that didn't need witnesses. Ivan died on an ordinary Tuesday. No storm, no warning, just a heart that stopped while boiling potatoes. Grace found him on the kitchen floor hours later, the radio still playing an old folk song they used to dance to. She sat beside him until the song ended. Then another played. Then silence. After the funeral, the village changed. Not loudly, just subtly. People spoke softer around her. Invitations faded. Doors closed earlier. Winter felt longer. When the government men came with papers and polite smiles, she didn't fully understand until the words sank in. Relocation. Unsafe structure. Remote zone. They said it kindly. They always do. Grace signed the paper because fighting required strength she no longer had. The house, her house, was boarded up within a week. They offered her a shared room in a distant town. Concrete walls. No forest. No Ivan in the air. She never went. Instead, she walked into the trees Ivan once warned her about. The forest didn't care that she was old, or alone, or grieving. It only cared that winter was coming. Grace found the tree by accident. A massive larch split by lightning decades ago, its hollow wide enough to crawl inside. At first, it was shelter for a night. Then two. Then a life. She lined the inside with cloth scraps and pine branches. Melted snow in tin cans. Ate berries in summer. Dried roots in winter. Pain became routine. Fear became background noise. The tigers came in late January. At first, she heard them only at night, distant, echoing calls that made her spine stiffen. The villagers used to say the forest belonged to them long before humans learned to walk upright. One evening, Grace climbed down to check her traps. That's when she saw the tracks. Fresh, massive, too close. Her breath caught, and instinct, ancient and sharp, pushed her upward. She climbed like a child again, nails splitting, knees screaming. By the time the first tiger appeared between the trees, she was already inside the hollow, heart hammering like it wanted out. They circled her tree for hours. One leapt, claws tearing bark inches below her feet. Another roared, a sound so deep it rattled her teeth. Grace curled inward, forehead against the wood, whispering Ivan's name like a prayer she wasn't sure anyone still heard. She stayed there all night. When morning came, the forest was quiet. She didn't climb down. Days passed, then weeks. The tree became more than shelter. It became a border between her and death. She learned when to stay still, when to listen, when to move only her eyes. Her body weakened. Her spirit hardened. One afternoon, as the sun bled orange through the snow, Grace noticed something new at the edge of the forest. Footprints. Human ones. She squinted, heart tightening. Not with fear this time, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. She leaned forward, gripping the bark, unsure whether to call out or stay silent, as the sound of approaching voices drifted closer through the trees, and for the first time in years, Grace had to choose between being found or remaining invisible. The voices grew clearer, rough, male, carried by cold air and crunching snow. Grace's fingers tightened around the bark until her knuckles burned. She hadn't spoken to another human in months, maybe longer. Time blurred when every day was about surviving the next hour. Tracks split here, one voice said. Old ones, but fresh claw marks. Grace swallowed. Hunters. Or worse, officials. She pressed her back into the hollow, heart racing. If they saw her tree, if they climbed, she wasn't sure whether she wanted rescue or silence. The forest had taken everything from her, but it had also hidden her when the world looked away. Then a voice, younger, uncertain. Wait. Look up. Grace froze. A face appeared below the hollow, a young man, maybe early 30s, bundled in a thick parka. His eyes widened, not with fear, but shock. He raised his hand slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Babushka?" he whispered. Are you alive?" The word hit her chest like a stone dropped into water. Babushka. Grandmother. A name she hadn't heard in years. Her lips trembled. No sound came. Another man stepped forward, older, broader, carrying a rifle lowered immediately when he saw her. "Holy God," he muttered. "She's living in the tree." Grace finally found her voice, thin and cracked. "Please," she said, "don't shout." They didn't. Instead, the younger man stepped back, dug into his pack, and pulled out a thermos. He unscrewed the lid, steam curling upward like a promise. "We won't come closer," he said gently. "Just can you drink this?" Grace stared. The smell reached her before the sight. Hot broth. Real food. Her eyes filled without permission. "I can't climb down," she whispered. "They come back." The older man nodded slowly. "We saw the tracks. You were smart to stay up." Smart. No one had called her that in a long time. They tied the thermos to a rope and hoisted it carefully. Grace's hands shook as she took it. The metal burned her frozen palms, but she didn't pull away. She drank too fast, broth spilling down her chin, and for the first time in months, warmth spread through her chest. If you were there in that moment, standing below that tree, what would you have done? Would you have turned away or stayed? Tell me honestly, in the comments. And if you felt that simple act of kindness, just one cup of warmth, press like, because compassion still matters. The men stayed until sunset. They didn't ask many questions, didn't judge. They told her their names, Mikhail and Artem, forestry workers checking wildlife movement after increased tiger activity. Artem kept glancing up at her tree, eyes soft, like he was afraid she might disappear if he blinked. "You shouldn't be here alone," Mikhail said carefully. "It's too dangerous." Grace nodded. "I know, but you stayed anyway." "Yes." "Why?"
She hesitated. Then quietly, because everything else was taken. The wind picked up again, colder now. Artem looked at Mikhail, then back at Grace. "We'll bring more food tomorrow. And a radio. You can't fight this winter alone." Grace didn't answer right away. Trust was heavy. Hope was heavier. But when Artem tied another bundle to the rope, dried bread, candles, gloves, she whispered, "Thank you." That night, she slept for 4 full hours. No tiger screams. No hunger cramps. Just exhaustion and the faint echo of human voices lingering like a lullaby. They came back the next day. And the next. Sometimes only Artem. Sometimes both. They never forced her to climb down. Never touched her without asking. They spoke about normal things. Broken trucks, their families, the way the forest felt different lately. Grace listened more than she spoke. One afternoon, Artem brought a small radio. He tuned it until static gave way to music, an old folk song. Grace's breath caught. "Ivan loved that one," she said before she could stop herself. Artem smiled gently. Then we'll keep it. Weeks passed. Word spread quietly. A woman in the forest. An old widow in a tree. Supplies began to appear, left at a distance, no questions asked. Grace began to feel something unfamiliar. But peace never lasts long in places ruled by hunger. One morning, the radio crackled with a warning. Tiger activity increasing, closer to human paths. That same night, Grace heard them again. Closer than ever. Branches snapped. Snow scattered. A roar ripped through the dark, violent and near. Grace clutched the inside of the hollow as claws struck the trunk, once, twice, sending vibrations through her bones. She didn't scream. She waited. At dawn, Artem didn't come, nor the next day. By the third night, the food bundle remained untouched at the base of the tree, half buried in snow. Grace's chest tightened with a fear sharper than the tiger's. Something was wrong. On the fourth morning, she heard voices again, different ones. Louder. Urgent. Men in uniforms. And among them, carried on a stretcher through the snow, was Artem, pale, unconscious, his leg wrapped in blood-soaked cloth. As Grace leaned forward, heart breaking open, realizing that the forest hadn't finished taking its price yet, Grace's breath left her in a shallow gasp as the stretcher passed beneath her tree. Snow clung to Artem's eyelashes. His lips were blue, slightly parted, like he was trying to say something but couldn't finish the thought. One of the men barked orders, medical words Grace didn't understand, while another scanned the tree-line with a raised rifle. A tiger ambush, someone said. He pushed the other guy out of the way. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, pushed someone else. For a second, the world tilted. The forest blurred. All she could see was the young man who brought her broth, who tuned her radio, who spoke to her like she still belonged somewhere, now broken and carried like a burden through the snow. Artem, she whispered, the name falling uselessly into the wind. They didn't notice her at first. They were too busy fighting time. But when one man finally looked up and saw her face framed in the hollow, his steps slowed. "That's her," he said softly. "The woman." Grace forced herself to speak louder. "Is he alive?" The man hesitated, the kind of pause that already answers the question. "Barely," he said. "We're taking him to the regional hospital. 2 hours if the road holds." Grace nodded, though her chest felt like it was caving inward. "Tell him," her voice cracked. She tried again. "Tell him I'm here." The man nodded once. They left tracks in the snow that the wind erased almost immediately. That night, Grace didn't sleep. She sat curled inside the tree, radio silent, staring into the dark where the stretcher had disappeared. Guilt pressed heavier than hunger ever had. Artem had stayed because of her. Had come back because of her. Had risked his body in a forest that already claimed too much. "I never asked you to," she whispered into the wood. "I never meant." The tree didn't answer. The next days were the hardest she'd known. No visits. No voices. Just the forest breathing around her, patient, indifferent. Tigers roared farther away now, but the silence hurt more. She rationed the last of the food. Talked to Ivan out loud again, like she used to after he died. "I made someone care," she said one evening. "And look what it cost." Memory crept in quietly, uninvited. She remembered the day Ivan saved a neighbor's child from falling through river ice. How he came home soaked, shaking, smiling like it was nothing. 2 weeks later, pneumonia took him. People said it wasn't connected. But Grace always wondered. Helping had a price. On the 5th day, the radio crackled. Static first. Then a voice, weak, familiar. "Grace." Her knees buckled. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'm here." The pause. Then, faintly, "Didn't want you to think I forgot." Tears streamed down her face unchecked. "You should be resting," she said, voice trembling. "You shouldn't be talking." He gave a breathy half-laugh that hurt just to hear. "Doctors say I'll keep the leg. Tiger missed the artery. Lucky, they say." But Grace pressed her forehead to the tree wall. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" he asked. "For making you come back." Another pause. Longer this time. "You didn't Artem said. I chose to. Silence settled between them, not empty, but full. Heavy with things neither of them could name. After the transmission ended, Grace stayed still for a long time. Something inside her shifted, slow and painful, like ice cracking on a river in spring. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would, and it changed how you saw yourself? If you have, write yes below and share their name. Sometimes gratitude deserves to be spoken out loud. 2 weeks later, the forest brought new footsteps. This time, they were cautious. Measured. Grace leaned forward and saw Mikhail again, older, more tired. With him were 2 others, a woman in a heavy coat with a medical bag, and a man holding official papers. Mikhail looked up. He's awake, he said simply. Asking about you every day. Grace closed her eyes. The woman stepped forward. My name is Elena, she said. I'm a nurse. We want to help you come down. Grace shook her head. I can't. We can make it safe, Elena said gently. Temporary shelter. Guards. Food. Heat. Grace's fingers dug into the bark. I've been promised things before. The man with the papers cleared his throat. This time, it's different. Grace looked at them, really looked. The careful distance. The lack of force. The way Mikhail's eyes never left her face, like he was afraid she might disappear again. What if I say no? She asked. Then we leave supplies, Elena said. And come back tomorrow. Grace swallowed. The forest had taught her survival. But Artem had taught her something else, that being seen didn't always mean being taken from yourself. I'll come down, she said slowly. But not today. They nodded. No arguments. That night, Grace packed what little she owned. A scarf that smelled like Ivan, a chipped mug, the radio. She touched the inside of the hollow one last time, feeling the grooves she'd worn into the wood. You kept me alive, she whispered to the tree. Thank you. At dawn, with ropes secured and hands waiting below, Grace began to climb, each movement careful, deliberate, as the ground she hadn't stood on in years waited beneath her feet, and for the first time since Ivan died, Grace stepped toward something unknown, unsure whether it would be mercy or another kind of loss, as the forest watched in silence. Grace's boots touched the snow, and the ground felt wrong. Too solid, too wide, like standing on a memory instead of a place. Her legs trembled, not from weakness alone, but from the shock of being held up by something that wasn't wood and air. Elena steadied her without rushing. Mikhail stood close, saying nothing, letting the moment belong to Grace. She didn't look back at the tree. If she did, she might climb right back inside. They wrapped her in a thick blanket and led her toward a small temporary shelter, canvas walls, a heater humming softly inside. The sound alone made her flinch. Warmth had become something her body didn't trust. Inside, the light was low and yellow. Elena checked her hands, her feet, her pulse. You're stronger than you think, she said quietly, almost to herself. Grace didn't answer. Strength felt like a word for other people. They fed her slowly. Soup first, then bread. Her stomach protested, but she endured it. Outside, the forest loomed, dark and endless. But for the first time in months, there was fabric between her and the wind. That night, she dreamed of Ivan. He was standing in the doorway of their old blue house, smiling the way he used to when she burned dinner. You stayed too long, he said gently. I didn't know where else to go, she replied. He stepped aside, letting light spill in. You do now. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the hum of the heater still alive. 2 days later, they took her to the hospital. The road was rough. Every bump sent pain through her bones, but she stared out the window, watching trees blur past, feeling like she was leaving a part of herself behind with every kilometer. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and boiled vegetables. Too clean. Too bright. Elena stayed with her through intake, through questions, through the gentle shock of mirrors and white sheets. And then Grace saw him. Artem lay in a bed near the window, his leg elevated, bandaged thickly. His face was thinner, but his eyes lit up when he saw her, like someone had turned on a light inside him. You came down, he said softly. She nodded, suddenly shy. I said I would. He smiled. I hoped you meant it. She sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The machines beeped quietly, marking time they were both lucky to still have. I thought I lost you, Grace said finally. Artem looked at the ceiling. I thought I scared you away. A small, broken laugh escaped her. It would take more than that. Days turned into weeks. Grace recovered faster than anyone expected. Food helped. Heat helped. But what helped most was being needed again. Small things at first. Folding blankets. Listening to other patients. Holding a woman's hand during a bad night. Artem watched her from his bed, something thoughtful growing behind his eyes. One afternoon he said, "You know, you saved me too." She frowned. "I didn't do anything." "You reminded me why I chose this job," he said. "Why risking myself ever made sense. Now it's your turn. Think about one small good thing you've done recently, something quiet, something kind. Share it below. Someone reading might need that reminder tonight more than you know." Not everyone was kind. A man from the administration visited one morning, clipboard in hand. He spoke of facilities and placements and age-appropriate care. Grace listened politely, the way she always had. When he left, she turned to Elena. "I don't want to disappear again." Elena met her eyes. "Then don't." They found her a small room in town, not concrete, but wood. A window that looked out onto trees. Artem helped move her things once he could stand, leaning heavily on a cane, pretending it was nothing. On the day Grace left the hospital, she stopped by Artem's bed. "You're still healing," she said. "So are you," he replied. She hesitated, then placed the radio on his bedside table. "For when you forget the forest isn't only teeth." He swallowed. "Will you visit?" Grace smiled. A real one, the kind that reached her eyes. "I live close now." The first night in her new room, Grace sat by the window, listening to the wind move through branches instead of howling against her bones. She wrapped Ivan's scarf around her shoulders and whispered, "I'm still here." Outside, the forest waited, no longer a prison, not yet a memory, as Grace closed her eyes, unaware that the hardest choice of her life still lay ahead, one that would ask her not how to survive, but how to forgive. The letter arrived on a gray morning, slid halfway under Grace's door like it was unsure whether it belonged there. The envelope bore an official seal, the same kind that once took her home without ever touching it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Forest Zone Reclassification. Unauthorized Occupancy. Risk Assessment Review. The words blurred, but the meaning sharpened fast enough to hurt. They were reopening the case. The man from the administration returned 2 days later, this time with another woman and a folder thick with documents. Grace sat across from them at a small table, her mug of tea untouched. "We need to talk about liability," the man said, tone smooth. "About what happened to our employee." Grace's breath caught. Artem chose. "We know," the woman interrupted gently. "But choices have consequences." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She replayed the forest in her mind, the tigers, the tree, Artem's blood in the snow. Had her existence caused harm? Had staying alive cost someone else their future? She visited Artem the next day, the letter folded tight in her pocket. "They're saying it's my fault," she said quietly. Artem's jaw tightened. "It's not. They wouldn't be asking if it didn't look that way." He exhaled slowly, pain flickering across his face. "When I stepped in front of that tiger, I wasn't thinking about you as a burden. I was thinking about you as a person." Grace looked away. "The world doesn't see it that way." Silence stretched between them, heavy with truth. That evening, Mikhail came by with news. "They're reviewing forest safety protocols. Someone needs to speak. Officially." Grace laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I lived in a tree. I don't speak officially." "But you survived," Mikhail said. "That matters." The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Grace sat in the small hall, hands folded, Ivan's scarf around her neck like armor. The panel asked questions about why she stayed, why she refused relocation, why she didn't report herself. "Because I was tired of being moved like furniture," she said softly. Because the forest was the only place that didn't ask me to disappear. Some faces softened. Others didn't. Then Artem stood. Leaning on his cane, voice steady despite the strain, he said, "I didn't save Grace because of policy. I saved her because leaving her there would have broken something in me that I couldn't replace." The room went quiet. The verdict came days later. No fault assigned. Case closed. Grace cried in Elena's arms, the weight lifting so suddenly it left her dizzy. If that moment touched something inside you, leave a red heart. Sometimes one small symbol says what our hearts can't put into words. Relief didn't erase fear.
Grace knew the forest would always carry shadows, not just of tigers, but of choices that couldn't be undone. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about forgetting harm. It was about refusing to let it define the rest of your life. Artem healed slowly. Physical therapy tested his patience. Grace visited often, bringing soup, stories, quiet company. One evening, he said, "Do you ever miss it?" She knew what he meant. "The tree?" she asked. He nodded. She thought for a long time. "I miss who I was there," she said finally. "But not the pain." He smiled. "That's fair." Winter loosened its grip. Snow melted. The forest changed color. Grace began volunteering at a small community center, reading to children, teaching them old songs Ivan loved. They listened, wide-eyed, like she was a storybook that could still surprise them. One afternoon, she received an invitation. A memorial ceremony for Ivan and others lost to the forest over the years. The village had decided to acknowledge what had been ignored for too long. Grace stood at the edge of the clearing, candle in hand, heart pounding. The forest loomed beyond, quiet now. Be honest. Could you forgive after being pushed out, forgotten, nearly erased? Type forgive if you could, or never if the wound would still be too deep. Grace stepped forward. She lit her candle and placed it at the base of a young larch tree. Not the same one, but close enough. "I forgive you," she whispered, not just to the people, but to the forest, to herself. As the flames flickered, Grace felt something settle inside her. Not closure, but peace enough to breathe, unaware that the final chapter of her journey would ask her to choose hope not just for herself, but for someone else still trapped in the cold. Spring arrived quietly, almost apologetically, as if the land itself wasn't sure it was allowed to be gentle again. Snow receded in thin, uneven patches. The river swelled and sighed. Grace watched it all from her window, hands wrapped around warm tea, feeling something unfamiliar settle into her days. Stability. It felt fragile, borrowed, like glass held too tightly. The call came late one evening, just as dusk folded the town into shadow. Elena's voice on the other end was careful, measured, the way it always was when news carried weight. "Grace," she said, "there's a woman." Grace closed her eyes. "Another one?" "Yes." A pause. Then softer, older, living near the eastern edge. They think she's been there all winter. Grace's chest tightened. Images rose uninvited. Frozen fingers, hollow shelters, nights spent listening for death in the dark. "They found tracks," Elena continued. "Tigers. Same pattern." Grace didn't hesitate. "Take me there." Elena exhaled. "I was hoping you'd say that." They drove at first light. The forest greeted Grace like an old acquaintance, familiar, watchful, unchanged. She felt it in her bones the moment she stepped out of the vehicle. The smell of damp earth. The hush beneath birdsong. "She's called Nina," Elena said quietly. 76. Widow. Refused relocation last year. Grace nodded. Of course she did. They found the shelter just before noon, a crude structure of fallen branches and tarps, half collapsed, hidden poorly among the trees. Inside, Nina sat wrapped in layers of cloth, eyes sharp despite her gaunt frame. She flinched when she saw them. "I'm not leaving," Nina snapped. "You can't make me." Grace stepped forward slowly, hands visible, voice steady. "I won't." Nina squinted at her. "You look like them." Grace shook her head. "I look like you." Something shifted. They sat together on the forest floor, sunlight filtering through new leaves. Grace listened, really listened, as Nina spoke of loss, of homes taken, of being told over and over that survival required surrender. "They don't understand," Nina said bitterly. "This place is all I have left." Grace nodded. "I know." Hours passed. No force. No paperwork. Just stories. When Nina finally agreed to leave, not forever, just for now, it wasn't because of policy or promises. It was because Grace said, "You don't have to choose between dignity and safety. I thought I did once. I was wrong." Nina cried then, quietly, like someone who hadn't allowed herself to in a long time. The town welcomed Nina with cautious kindness. A room was prepared, food brought, space given. Grace visited her every morning, helping her adjust, reminding her gently that staying didn't mean disappearing. One evening, as Grace walked home, Artem waited outside her building, cane in hand, smile warm. "You didn't tell me you were going back out there," he said. She smiled back. "You didn't tell me you'd walk this far." "Fair," he admitted. Then, serious, "I was worried." "I know." They stood in silence, the kind that no longer needed filling. "You've changed," Artem said finally. Grace considered it. "I remembered who I was," she replied. Weeks later, Nina laughed for the first time during a community lunch. The sound caught Grace off guard, light, surprised, alive. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. "If you believe love still wins, even quietly, even late, comment him in. Let's fill this space with hope." Someone scrolling right now might need to see it. Summer came. The forest softened. The town held a small gathering near its edge. Not a ceremony, not a warning. Just people. Music. Children running between trees without fear. Grace sat on a bench, Ivan's scarf folded neatly beside her. Artem joined her, moving easier now, pain still present but no longer defining. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. "To the tree?" she asked. He nodded. Grace watched the tree leaves sway gently. "No," she said. "But I think about what it gave me." "And what's that?" "The proof that I could endure," she said. "And the reminder that I don't have to anymore." As the sun dipped low, Grace felt something settle deep inside. Not the sharp relief of survival, but the quiet strength of purpose. She wasn't just living past the forest now. She was carrying something forward. And she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that her story wasn't meant to end with escape, but with what she chose to do after. As the light faded and voices rose in laughter behind her, Grace stood slowly, feeling the years in her bones but no longer bowed by them, ready to face one final truth, that healing, like survival, is something we pass on, not something we keep to ourselves. Autumn returned with a gentler hand than Grace remembered. The air cooled, but it no longer bit. Leaves turned gold instead of falling like warnings. Grace walked slower these days, but she walked with purpose. A canvas bag over her arm, a notebook tucked inside, Ivan's scarf still with her like a quiet companion. People had started to recognize her. Not as the woman from the tree. That name faded, but as Grace. The one who listened. The one who knew how to sit with silence without trying to fix it. She volunteered at the community center twice a week now, helping others navigate the same systems that once pushed her aside. Nina came with her sometimes. They sat together during tea hours, two women with lined faces and unbroken eyes, sharing stories with younger volunteers who listened like they were hearing history whispered instead of shouted. One afternoon, a teenage girl approached Grace after a session. "My grandmother won't leave her house," the girl said nervously. "They say it's unsafe. She says it's all she has." Grace felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear now, but recognition. "Tell her she doesn't have to choose between being safe and being herself," Grace said gently. "And if she wants, I'll talk to her." The girl smiled, relief softening her shoulders. Outside, Artem waited again, a habit now. His cane rested and used against the bench. He didn't need it most days, but he kept it close, like a reminder of where he'd been. "You're building something," he said as they walked. Grace shrugged. "I'm just staying." "That's how it starts," he replied. They reached the edge of town where the forest began. Not deep, just enough that the trees stood close, familiar but no longer threatening. Grace stopped there, watching sunlight flicker through branches. "I used to think surviving was the whole story," she said. "But it's not." Artem waited. "It's what we do with the years we didn't expect to have." Winter would come again. She knew that. The forest would never stop being dangerous. Systems would still fail people. Loneliness would still find new shapes. But Grace had learned something the cold could not take from her. Pain does not disqualify kindness. Age does not erase worth. And survival is not the opposite of living. It's only the beginning. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried this pain and still chose compassion. One small click can be your way of saying, "I felt you." Grace turned away from the forest and walked back toward the lights of town, footsteps steady, heart open, ready for whatever came next, unaware that the final lesson of her journey was already waiting quietly within her, asking not for strength but for meaning. The first snowfall came earlier than expected. Grace noticed it from her window before dawn, thin flakes drifting down, quiet and deliberate, as if the sky itself had learned restraint. She watched them settle on the street, on the trees, on the roofs of homes where lights were already glowing inside. Winter would always return, but this time, it didn't feel like a threat. Grace wrapped her coat tighter and stepped outside. The cold kissed her cheeks, familiar but no longer cruel. She walked slowly, greeting neighbors by name now, people who once passed her without seeing. Someone waved from across the road. A child ran past her, laughing, boots splashing through slush. Life, continuing. At the community center, Nina was already there, arranging cups with careful hands. She looked up and smiled, a real smile, the kind that had once seemed impossible. "You're early," Nina said. "So are you," Grace replied. They worked in comfortable silence, two women shaped by loss but no longer defined by it. When the room filled, Grace took her usual seat by the window. She listened to stories, small ones, ordinary ones. Complaints about heating bills, a new baby, a missing cat, and she realized something that made her chest ache gently. This ordinary mess of humanity was what she had been surviving for all along. Later that afternoon, Grace walked alone toward the edge of town, not deep into the forest, just close enough to hear it breathe. The trees stood bare now, branches dark against the white. Somewhere far away, a tiger might still be walking, powerful, indifferent, alive. The forest hadn't changed. She had. Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, the chipped mug she had carried from the tree. She had kept it all this time, unsure why. She placed it gently at the base of a young tree, snow dusting its rim. "Thank you," she whispered, not in fear, not in grief, but in acknowledgement. Then she turned back. That evening, Artem joined her for dinner. They didn't talk about the forest. They talked about soup recipes, about a broken streetlight, about nothing that needed fixing. As he stood to leave, he paused. "You know," he said, "people ask me sometimes if I regret that day." Grace looked at him, heart stilling. "I don't," he continued, "because it led me here, to this version of myself." Grace nodded slowly. "Me too." After he left, Grace sat by the window again, watching snow fall thicker now. She thought of Ivan, of his hands, his laugh, the life they shared. The pain of losing him would never vanish. But it no longer owned her. Grace understood the final truth then, the one the forest, the tree, the tigers, the loneliness had all been shaping her toward. We don't honor the lives we lose by shrinking. We honor them by staying open, by choosing kindness even when it costs us something, by reaching back into the cold, not to live there again but to guide someone else out. Grace turned off the light and prepared for sleep, not afraid of the dark anymore. Outside, winter settled in, steady, inevitable, no longer a monster. And inside a small wooden room, an 80-year-old widow rested with peace in her chest, knowing that her survival had become something far greater than endurance. It had become meaning.